And that's just it. There's something about myth and story that just wakes our hearts up to something deeper. And if the truth be known, every engaging movie or book you've ever read, any song that has brought some resonance of insight or enlightenment or strength, usually draws its tale from something deeper and more true. That's why it reflects so well. That's why it's what we call resonates or connects with us so well. That these movies, these stories, they're telling a story, but the basis of it is based on a truer story that we know, that's wired in us in such a way. There must be, yes, this is it. This is true. And the story that it's coming from, as author John Eldredge talks about, he proposes that that larger story, the story of God and all that he is up to through the Old Testaments and the New Testaments, the story of the long and relentless pursuit of God for his children, is the truer story that all of these things are drawn on. There's something about us that resonates and connects with a character who has sort of lost his way or her way, that has sort of had the odds stacked against him. And behind that character, there's insight to a story that something happened to them. Something occurred that shifted their identity, that just changed the trajectory of how they see themselves, how they see the world around them, how they see God. And so the character's usually just trying to plug along and just do the best they can. And there's a glory that's been somewhat diminished and downplayed. And at some point as the story progresses, circumstances and events seem to draw out the true glory, the true purpose of what that person was called to do. And we see them sort of encounter this wrestling match, and then this breakthrough, and then this moment of deliverance in which they come through for the very thing that they were always meant to do. And when we see stories like that, there's something in us that goes, yes, that's what I want. I wish that were true. And that's the good news, though. That very desire, that wish it was true, or why can't it be like that, is the reality that is embedded in us that says, yes, it is true. Because from desire, we will pursue the reality of what is true. I'm going to start a series that's based on this book here, and I encourage, you don't have to read this, but I do encourage it, that I'm going to follow through over the next few sessions, called Waking the Dead by John Eldredge. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of it today, and then I'm going to go right into one of the chapters and just basically teach off of it in the brief time that we have today. And so as you come back around, I will go back a little bit and pick up where we left off and then move forward. But the idea behind this book that came out in 2003 is to create the reality of the larger story and who we are, where we are, and what God is up to. Unpacking the myth of the larger story, the narrative of the Bible. And so to do that, let me just sort of take you through a little bit of what this book does, where it goes, and where it's from. Now, I use the Lord of the Rings trailer as a backdrop because it covers some very key points in the story that we're talking about today. There's a little, in the trailer, it gives a little bit of a scene, a few things, and then this bullet, and it says, fate has chosen him. And then it goes on, and you see this pursuit and this getting away from and this battle. And the next thing that pops up, it says, evil will hunt him. And then a little further in that mix, we see these characters that come around the main character who's trying to accomplish a mission. And he's quick to say, I cannot do this by myself. And yet the very destiny of the free world is placed in his hands, that he has been chosen to bear this ring. And that if he fails at this task, all is lost. And so a fellowship will protect him. And we find that these themes run through the true gospel, the Christian life as it was made to be. That there's a lot going on here that we're going to unpack. In Waking the Dead, the author himself gives a good overview, and I'm going to rely heavily on his text today as I move through this. There will be some biblical verses that will correspond, but for today's teaching, it's going to be a heavy reliance on this text. I say that because it's not my original material. I'm simply representing it. So, Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. That's the offer of Christianity from God himself. Just look at what happens when people are touched by Jesus. The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life. In other words, to be touched by God is to be restored, to become all God meant you to be. That is what Christianity is supposed to do for you. Make you whole, set you free, bring you fully alive. But Jesus also warned that the path to that life is narrow, and few people would find it. You'll notice few have. Waking the dead will help you find that life, see the fierce battle over your heart, and embrace all that God has for you, because there is so much more. The question is, do you want it? I looked over a summary a while back to just sort of compile this. I read this book initially back around 2005, 2006. And you hear me talk a lot about John Eldredge and some of the things around that, because I believe that the theological work that he has done really gives a clear view around some of the aspects of what Christianity is about. So this may sound like an endorsement, but what I'm really trying to tell you is what I'm speaking to you about is my own experience in some of these areas that I will share with you in just a minute, a little bit of how that unpacked. But essentially that this does seem to work, not just for me, but for hundreds of people that I've seen embrace this, bringing a new life and a new trajectory and a new direction, a new interpretation of the biblical narrative, the story that God is up to. So out of this webpage called shepherdproject.com, this fellow Don Ross sort of gives a quick overview. And so what I want to do is give you a quick overview of the book, and then I'm going to move into the teaching that we have today. The book basically unpacks in 4 parts. And so what I like about that trailer is you're going to sort of see how this unfolds over time that relates back to these 4 parts. The first main part is called Seeing Our Way Clearly. This is a huge orientation point, because a lot of us arrive at a church or a life circumstance or whatever, and we're not really clear what's going on. I've used the comparison that Eldredge shares so often about life being like showing up to a movie 20 minutes late. Something important seems to be going on. There's a lot of character and a lot of action, but if you've ever come to a movie late, you really are working to find out what happened before, what's really going on, and where it's going. And if we sort of approach the metaphor or the comparison of life, just to take a look at where you are right now, today, Sunday, May 3rd, where is this story going? Where has it been? And what is God up to in your story right now? See, the day in, day out grind of routine has this way of sort of diminishing things. And what we saw on the trailer is basically a mythic story. Now let me say something about myth. When we hear the word myth, it's often easy to think, oh, it's a fiction, or it's not true, it's just a fable or a fairy tale. But in literature or literary writings, myth is not a falsehood. Myth is a trueness to the essence of the story that may be told in different ways, but the truth of the story is still retained. For example, for those of you who have read or seen Lord of the Rings, that's not a reality. There is no Middle Earth, there is no Gandalf, there is no Sauron. Or is there? Is there evil? Is there a hero? Is there a mission that we could say is true about the humanity and history of life? And we go to our Bible story and we find evil, and we find a mission, and we find all that is encompassed in that story, a hero and heroes. So there's a truth to the myth. The story itself may not be historically accurate in this case with Lord of the Rings, but the essence of the story resonates true. And so myth is a way of telling a story that brings metaphor and poetry and depth and color and energy and life to the reality that we deal with. It is no less true than 2 + 2 = 4 in that sense. So in an orientation, we're trying to figure out who we are, where we are, and what God is up to in the larger story of our lives. So the book basically breaks out in 4 parts to do that. Seeing our way clearly. We will start with that today. It's an orientation about how we see things or maybe not see things so good, the need for clarity, that life is hard, but I don't have to tell you that. That to really understand our lives and the fact that life is hard, we really need a true context not just set of circumstances or situations that has brought us into this place. The next chapter in that section is called The Eyes of the Heart, in which we learn to see things differently. Some of the things I talk about with folks in here, I say, hey, have you seen this movie? Have you seen this movie? Check this out. What does this mean to you? We find a way of looking at the world mythically and even epically and interpreting things different. We can't do that just with our heads. There has to be a heart issue. What do I mean by heart? Well, take a look at, well, the tide's gone down. I was going to point out the super high tide, but take a look at the nature out there. You could tell me in a paragraph or two what it looks like, but it would not correlate with the experience of seeing and embracing that on a beautiful day like that. See, the eyes of the heart add depth. They add richness beyond just facts and situations. It'll move into the heart of all things, in which we're going to discover that the heart, the very essence of our humanity, our purpose, our direction in life, our thoughts, our feelings, our story, the very centrality of our life is central to the Christian walk. You simply cannot walk out any kind of life relationship out of your head or just your feelings. But the heart is the fullness of life, and a restoration of that heart, I propose to you, is what God is up to. It is central to the Christian life. So as we move to what's called the ransomed heart, the book will go on to talk about this restoration process, how Christ has transformed each of us and given us a new heart. That's good news, but we need to see what that means. And because your hearts have been made new in the transaction of salvation, here's more good news. We are our truest selves again. We have the power to overcome things, to be different people, to change the trajectory and the decisions of our life. See, Christianity is more than don't do this, you should do that. That's simply compliance. That just says follow the rule. But love is obedience, and we do things differently because our hearts are restored, because we want to. Not because we shouldn't, but because we want to be different people. You can only exercise discipline for so long. You know this. Things we've tried to quit, things we've tried to do. We get tired, we get frustrated, we get disappointed, or we get angry. And we just say, forget it. See, that's compliance. And while discipline is a helpful thing, the deeper issue of the heart explains our motives and our transactions, our beliefs, our values. So at the end of the day, if the heart changes, our values change. And if our values change and our attitudes change, then those things that we're trying to stop doing or start doing that are much more whole come out of the places of our hearts, and that comes from a restored heart. That's the good news of the gospel. That's the reality of what's promised. You have a glory hidden in your heart because you bear the image of the living God. Now, it had been marred through the generational sin and the things that we know about. But in the newness and the restoration of the transaction of salvation, you have a new heart, and that glory becomes fully alive again. The next part that this book moves into is called the four streams. We're going to understand and explore a little bit about how these streams sort of feed our Christian life. What do I mean by that? Well, streams are the means by which we experience the full life that Christ has offered. The first stream is discipleship. It's basically learning the fundamentals. It's walking with God and learning how to study Scripture and just sort of get the facts like we're doing today, getting the reality of what's going on. After discipleship, there's counseling. This is huge. God counsels us, but other people counsel us, help us see things differently, understand the world differently, understand ourselves differently in the context of community. As Frodo said, I can't do this alone. I need more. So counseling is something, as well as a profession. The third stream is deep healing and restoration. In the transformation of a new heart and a new set of attitudes and beliefs, we can't overlook the fact that there are deep wounds, things that have happened to us in our lives, that can forever alter the trajectory of how we try to move forward in the fullness of our life, our mission and our calling. If we are to play the hero, the unique part that you have been given, that we have been given in the story, we must have all of our hearts together. Not just half of it, not just the part that doesn't have the shrapnel, the wounds, the lies, the abuse. All of that has to be healed. And there's a way for that to happen. There is healing available. That's what the gospel promises. And then there's finally spiritual warfare. The reality that evil exists and our life is opposed. As John says in one of his books, the story of your life is the story of the long and brutal assault upon your heart, your story, by an enemy who fears you and knows what you can be. Wouldn't that explain a lot? If that could be factored into the equation of who we are and where we are and what's going on, if there has been an assignment against you, and I'm not trying to develop paranoia here, it's simply a balance of reality. I think we could all agree, whatever that looks like, life is hard, and it does seem like some things have been set against us. How would you explain otherwise the theme, not just the randomness of things that have happened in our lives, but the very essence and the theme, the common denominator that seems to come to my wound, your wound? Why does it always read like that? It would imply a strategy. It would imply a purpose of taking you out in the very place that your glory exists. The very thing you were made for is where the assault comes in. I've shared this before. If you're called to leadership in some domain of your life, and the assaults are against your competence, your confidence, your ability to lead, your goodwill for other people, your trust in other people, you will never be a leader. Because you'll be taken out by the idea that you can't trust people and you don't have what it takes and you'll never amount to anything. You see, these things happen that reinforce those messages, and they are directed right at your glory, the very thing you were made to do. It's almost like if you want to know what you were made to do, look at what's come against you in those very places. It will tell you the opposite of that. It points you right in the very thing you were made to do. And then there's the way of the heart. John talks about in the last part of the book the fellowships of the heart, about community and being in a place where we belong and we can be protected and we can offer this love and a whole heart to the benefit of others while we take care of ourselves, paying attention to others and to our needs. Because indeed, folks, your heart, whatever condition it is indeed the treasure of the kingdom. So let me jump in. Let me start with the first section here, and this will lead us into the reflection time. There are three big ideas I want to convey in this section here. One is we need clarity. We need to understand a little bit of what's going on, the orientation to our lives. Because the offer, point two, is life. There is an offer of life that comes that Jesus says throughout, and I'll read a couple scriptures here on that in just a second. And the third main point, and I'll repeat these again at the end, are we are at war. We live in a conflict. I hate to be the one to break the news to you, but you probably know that anyway. The fact is there is a conflict, and it is set against us, against humanity, against you, against our communities, against this world. And I'll explain briefly why that is. So let me start really quick with this. Point one, most of us, and this is the point of clarity, live in a fog most of the time. We kind of do life right about here, whatever's in front of us. We've set some things in motion, but the day-to-day, the hour-to-hour, the next step is usually just about right here. And everybody knows that what's held here, you cannot see beyond very well. And that's just the reality of a busy life. It is what it is. It's not an accusation, but it's something that we must contend with. Let me tell you quickly how I first encountered this confusion. In 2002 or 3, I was about 5 or 6 years back into this Christian walk. I had this encounter a few years before in which I was sort of led back into church after being away from church for a long, long time through an addiction and through all sorts of stuff that just took away my life. And I'd left the church at 13 or 14, and I didn't darken the doors again until my mid-30s. Now, the on-ramp to that was a stint through, and still is, a 12-step recovery program in which I was reintroduced in a whole new perspective about God. And along with that community and some other things, it brought about the transformation of a full-blown alcoholic into a guy that not only didn't drink anymore, he was right pleased that he didn't, and moved on into life, just basically started doing life again. Marriage, family, jobs, houses. And about 7 years into that, I hit a dry point. I hit a stuck point. I was doing all the stuff that good recovering people do, but I felt there was something more, that very thing I said earlier to you. Could this be true? I just knew there was more, something else that I needed to go find. And so I found this church, and Robin and I went to that, and we took the kids there, and we learned a lot about Christianity, a lot of what you hear here, a lot of what you experienced in Passport, the fundamentals. And we were practicing all that out. So at this point, in 2002, 2003, where I bring you into the story, I'm in recovery for 10 years, so is Robin, and we've got good careers, and we've been back to school, and life's going on. And we're living in Aiken, South Carolina at this point because I got on with a job out in that direction. But I was also working in a position where I could sort of choose where I lived because I was traveling a lot. And I felt, I just knew this, that we were supposed to come back to Charleston and reconnect with the church and continue with our Christian walk here. We were doing some of that out there for a couple of years, but I just felt this huge, huge pull. I just knew it was God. I knew it was. And we wrestled with it because it was hard to do this, but at the end of the day, we chose to come back. And up to that point, I always thought, if you do God's will, you're going to be fine. Everything will work out beautifully for you. And you'll know you're doing God's will because the doors just keep opening, right? That's the naivete, because what I wasn't factoring in is that there's much against moving in God's will. Not just a general theme of evil or something set against it. I'm talking about a targeted destruction. And what happened is, as soon as we moved back, I mean day 2, all hell broke loose in every domain of our life. None of it could have been planned. Relationships that were good went sour. An ex-husband that was involved with partial custody of the kids just went crazy, just went berserk out of nowhere. Abused one of the kids and just created havoc in our life. So now we've got all these authorities involved, and then this particular church that I was going to was pushing back. It was just like they ignored me. The whole thing about coming back was just a disappointment to me. I didn't feel relief anywhere. I felt buried in disappointment and anger and frustration, and this went on for 2 years. 2 years. Until I read a Max Lucado book, a Christian author one time, where he talked about his trip to Brazil and where all hell broke loose, and it just occurred to me, this is true. Just because you're doing God's will doesn't mean it's going to get easy. In fact, it will probably be harder. And here's why. You see, the idea is that, like a lot of us, I was in a place of not really factoring in all that was going on. That there is so much more spinning around than just my obedience and love for God. While that is essential, if I don't factor in the rest of it, I'm just simply being a naive child in this, and I'm getting hammered. And that's exactly what happened. I could go on about how difficult that was, but I hope I've imparted at least enough to tell you that for 2 long years, we were just getting hammered on everything. Animals died out of nowhere. Mysterious, just death, died on the doorstep. Just weirdness, right? Not random, but systematically and consistently. So we ask the question, why is life so hard? And I want to propose that there's more going on here than meets the story. See, we navigate life and hardships and relationships and goals and dreams really the best we can. We set out to do the best we can. I want to get this job. I want to raise my kids here. I want to accomplish these things. And these are all good. But what we tend to lack is a clear orientation to 4 points: person, place, time, and situation. Listen to this story. When Spillane treats injured seamen offshore, one of the first things he evaluates is their degree of consciousness. The highest level, known as alert and oriented ×4, describes almost everyone in an everyday situation. They know who they are, where they are, what time it is, and what just happened. If someone suffers a blow to the head, the first thing they lose is recent events. So they're alert and oriented ×3. And the last thing they lose is their identity. A person who has lost all levels of consciousness, right down to their identity, is said to be alert and oriented ×0. When John Spillane wakes up in the water, he is alert and oriented ×0. His understanding of the world is reduced to the fact that he exists and nothing more. Almost simultaneously, he understands that he's in excruciating pain. for a long time, and that is all he knows. And that's an excerpt from a book called The Perfect Storm. You remember the movie. John Spillane is a pararescue jumper sent into the North Atlantic, into the worst storm of the 20th century. The perfect storm, as the book and the film called it, to rescue a fisherman lost at sea. When his helicopter goes down, he's forced to jump into pitch blackness from an unknown height. And when he hits the water, he's going so fast, it's like hitting the pavement from 80 feet above. He's dazed and confused, just as we are when it comes to the story of our lives. It's the perfect analogy. We have no idea who we really are, why we're here, what's happened to us, or why. Honestly, most days we are alert and oriented times zero. So when we wake up in this condition, when we take a full assessment of our lives, our orientation is often distorted. We have a general idea of maybe who we are. We haven't thought much about it because you just sort of wake up with this self-awareness, but we kind of know where we are situationally. But isn't that just a speck of the larger story? It's the looking at life right here. And we raise the questions oftentimes when things are tough, and this is back to my question, why is life so hard? He goes on to say, it raises questions like this. Has God abandoned us? Did we not pray enough? Is this just something we accept as part of life, suck it up, even though it breaks our hearts? After a while, the accumulation of event after event that we do not like and do not understand erodes our confidence that we are part of something grand and good, and it reduces us to a survivalist mindset. I know, we've been told that I know, we're told that we matter to God, and part of us partly believes it. But life has a way of chipping away at that conviction, undermining our settled belief that he is, if that's true, then why didn't he, fill in the blank, heal your mom, save your marriage, get you married, or help you out more? And oftentimes, either we think, A, we're blowing it, or B, God is holding out on us, or some combination of both, which is where most people land. Think about it. Isn't this where you land, with all the things that haven't gone the way you'd hoped and wanted? Isn't it some version of I'm blowing it, in that it's your fault, you could have done better, you could have been braver or wiser or more beautiful or something? Or God is holding out on me, and that you know he could come through, but he hasn't. And what do you make of that? And this is the big question, by the way, the one every philosophy and religion and denominational tale on Christianity has been trying to nail down since the dawn of time. What is really going on here? Good grief, life is brutal. Day after day it hammers us till we lose sight of what God intends toward us, and we haven't the foggiest idea why the things that are happening to us are happening to us. Then you watch lives go down with the Twin Towers, read about children starving in Ethiopia, and wham. If God is good and really in charge and all that. And it brings up the issue that things are tough, are they not? But contrast that with John 10:10. The offer is life. Jesus is really clear on this. The Bible is very clear on this. Listen to some of these verses. John 10:10. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. We don't usually hear that part. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the fullest. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Proverbs 4:23. You have made known to me the path of life. Psalm 16:11. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. From John 1:4. Come to me to have life. From John 5:40. And tell the people the full message of this new life. Acts chapter 5, verse 20. The offer of life that unfolds from this is not just for some distant future, though that part is true. There is an eternity, and there's a gloriousness, and there's a reunion at the end of all this, where every tear is dried and every wound is healed, and no more death, no more sorrow. But to hold out for that, as John says, is like engaging in marriage and saying, we will look forward to a good retirement together. I mean, isn't there a whole lot of life before then that we're going for, that we're living out of? All the days of our lives are part of that process. So if the gospel is true, then it's not just the end, it is here and now. And this is so critical. Because if this isn't real, if this isn't happening, then we just need to be waiting around playing bingo or doing the best we can until it's time to go home. And while that's a glorious thing, there is much here now. And if we don't factor in the fact that this life is here for now, then we are missing the biggest part of what Jesus is up to and what the gospel has to offer. Why we would bother, by the way, to pursue this. So let me suggest another statement that comes from St. Irenaeus, early century saint that John uses as part of this. He says that the glory of God is man fully alive. The glory of God is man fully alive. What that statement is basically saying is that God takes glory. He's invested. He loves people coming fully alive. That is what he is up to. That is what it's all about, is restoring the very creation, bringing his children home, but not just getting them home in relationship, but bringing us full life. That it brings God glory when the enemy is defeated and someone is rescued from the burning heap of alcoholism or abuse or oppression or some kind of bondage. That snatching people from the fire, the flames, is what God is all about. And that is his glory when people are set on their feet and move to a full and purposeful life. It brings him honor. The glory of God is man fully alive. So we hear two things in that. That if this life is hard and it's opposed, but yet it's offered for life, and that God takes great delight in restoring your life and your story, then it raises one other point. Why is life so hard? Because life is opposed. This is essential, that we get this orientation, that we understand that there is good news, but there's also some troublesome news. Something is set against us. We live in a world at war. All our days will be lived in the midst of a great battle against good and evil and played out in and around us. And we go back to the garden, the story of that, to hear that in this paragraph. John says, I dare say we've heard a bit about original sin, but not nearly enough about original glory, which comes before sin and is really deeper to our nature. We were crowned with glory and honor. Why does a woman long to be so beautiful? Why does a man hope to be found brave? Because we remember, if only faintly, that we were once more than we are now. The reason you doubt that there could be a glory to your life is because that very glory has been the object of a long and brutal assault. For lurking in that garden was an enemy. This mighty angel had once been glorious as well, the captain of the Lord's host, beautifully and powerful beyond compare. But he rebelled against his Creator, led a great battle against the forces of heaven, and was cast down. Banished from his heavenly home, but not destroyed, he waited for an opportunity to take his revenge. Unable to overthrow the mighty one, he turned his sights on those who bore his image. He lied to us about where true life was to be found, and we believed him. We fell, and our glory faded. As Milton said, that's an old author, faded so soon. Or as David lamented, you turned my glory into shame. One last point on this idea that something is set against us. We must fight if we are to find out who we really are and if we want the life that is offered to us. Until we come to terms with war as the context of our days, we will not understand life. We will misinterpret 90% of what's happening around us and to us. It will be very hard to believe that God's intentions toward us are life abundant. It will be even harder not to feel that somehow we're just blowing it. Worse, we'll begin to accept some really awful things about God. That 4-year-old girl being molested by her daddy, that's God's will. That ugly divorce that tore your family apart, God wanted that to happen too. And that plane crash that took so many lives, was that desired by God? Most people get stuck at some point because God appears to have abandoned them. He's not coming through. Speaking about her life with a mixture of disappointment and cynicism, a young woman recently said to me, "God is rather silent right now." Yes, it's been awful. I don't discount that for a moment. She's unloved, she's unemployed, and she's under a lot. But her attitude strikes me as deeply naive, on the level of someone caught in a crossfire who asks, rather shocked and with a sense of betrayal, "God, why won't you make them stop firing at me?" I'm sorry, but that's not where we are right now. It's not where we are in the story. That day is coming later when the lion shall lie down with the lamb and will beat swords into plowshares. But for now it's bloody battle. And it sure explains a whole heck of a lot. Before he promised us life, Jesus warned that a thief would try to steal, kill, and destroy. How come we don't think that the thief then actually steals, that he kills, and that he destroys? You won't understand your life, you won't see clearly what has happened to you, or how to live forward from here unless you see it as a battle, a war against your heart, and you're going to need your whole heart for what's coming next. I don't mean what's coming next in the story I'm telling. I mean what's coming next in the life you're living. There are a few things I know, and one thing I do know is this: we don't see things as clearly as we ought to, as we need to. We don't understand what's happening around us or to us or those we love, and we're practically clueless when it comes to the weight of our own lives and the very glory that's being held back. Some of you don't see it yet, and that's all right. We have a whole book ahead of us. If it's true that there's a great and fierce battle unfolding all around us and against us, why isn't the enemy more visible? And if there's a glory to my life, well then, why don't I see that? Why do I struggle so much? And where is that life that God offers? We don't see clearly because we don't see with the eyes of the heart, which will be our next topic, the eyes of the heart. Let me just close up with this. The three main points are that we need clarity to understand clearly the context of our lives and to the larger story. That there is an offer in Christianity for life, now and in the future. And the now is what we're looking at to move forward. We were at war. We live in the midst of a battle of good and evil. That's just the reality of our situation. And we must fight for the very life that we seek, the trueness of what we are about to be. It's not totally up to us, but we must engage. And there will be some discussion on that soon. In your bulletin, in that center section, you will see three main ideas restated and some questions for you to consider in your reflection time today. As you take a look at that, I encourage you to look at where you've been and what God is up to. Some of the questions that I think are just very real about that, and reflect on our conversation today. The offer is life. Let's pray. God, we just thank you for the opportunity to maybe reinterpret our stories, to get some insight, some clarity to what's really going on, to where we've been and who we are and what you are up to and what's going on around us. What time is it, God? Where are we in this story of the life and the larger story and the story that you've written for us, the part that we are to play? God, I pray that you would just raise up the hope and the energy and the strength in our hearts, that we can see that there is a glory that you are restoring, a wholeness that you are bringing, a restoration and love for you and your love for us, that we can set aside some of the questions, not as unthinking people, but enough to see truth in you first, and then to resume those questions so that they can be resolved. God, we do pray for clarity. We pray for the life. And we pray against all that has been assaulting us as we trust in you to protect us. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. As we move into community,